I had. I don't know, it was kind of amazing like that because, I mean, they've got some really good writers like that. And then what they would do, you're looking at a creative consultant is what you're looking at here. And, what that means is I know where the porta potties are on set. But they would send, each one of the episodes to me, like, and I would read the episodes and then line edit, and tell them what I liked, what I didn't like, what they needed to change, little things like that. And so nothing came as much of a surprise, to be honest with you. And I'm kind of pleased, with the direction that they did because they had to do a kind of truncated version of the things that I was doing, which was a little bit tough, I think, for them. But I had already set the trajectory of the books, 7 or 8 years previously, and I knew what was going to happen to these characters, after 5 books, after 10 books, after 15 books, after 20 books. I know what's going to happen to them and where it's all going to be going. And it was interesting to see how much of it they listened to very carefully and did. The only time I ever argued with them like it was one of the very first meetings that I had with the producers like that, and they said, well, we're thinking about making Walt and Henry about 10 years younger than they are in the books. And I got my redneck cowboy author on, and I was like, well, now why are we doing that? And they said, well, because we'd really like this TV show to run for about 10 years, and we'd rather not have Walt and Henry on walkers, I had a hard time arguing that one.
As much as I love Longmire on Netflix, I love your books more.
Thank you.
Your writing is lyrical.
I'm not going to argue with you.
And I miss that, the way you describe things, like I had never seen a sagebrush before. And so I think that's what most of the readers feel.
Oh, thank you.
But also as a writer myself, I would love to ask if you recommend any books on writing, or are you just all pure talent?
No. There are a couple like that I think, the first thing is read good writers. Read good writers. That helps out a lot, because it kind of raises your bar internally and makes you have to work a little bit harder. Like, if people ask, where did the name The Red Pony Bar come from? Like, well, it's from Steinbeck. One of my absolute favorite authors of all time is John Steinbeck. Like, and every time I read him, I want to throw his books in a fire because I'm like, damn, he's good. Damn. And then the two that I know of like that I think are just probably the best instructional books is one is that book by Wallace Stegner, who actually taught at the Stanford writing program, and one is it's called On Teaching and Writing Fiction. Is what it is. It's a very small, little thin book, really not too much to it at all. And then there's another fellow by the name of Ron Carlton who wrote a book called Ron Carlton Writes a Short Story by Grey Wolf Press. Like, if you haven't ever read Ron Carlton, he's a pretty amazing writer. He has a lot of short stories that appear in the Atlantic, in a lot of different magazines, but he's a really magnificent writer. Like, what's really incredible about him is you'll read his book and then you will be like, I can write. And there are mornings when you need that. You really are. But those two are probably the ones that I would like to point out and say, definitely you need to take a look at those.
Thank you.
You bet, my pleasure.
I don't know if you were responsible for, choosing Lou Dunn and Phillips to play the part. But if so, you chose very well. He lends a sense of dignity to the whole thing.
Thank you.
Not so.
He captures the spirituality of the character very, very well. I knew that there was going to be a sense of spirituality in the books, but I knew it probably wasn't going to be a mainstream, white spirituality. And the reason for that is that this goes back a little bit to your question. I think going back to the Wallace Stegner quote, there's a good buddy of mine, Marcus Red Thunder, who is the guy that I modeled Henry after. And it's really kind of tough, like that when you go around stealing people to stick in your books, because I live in a state that has only 500,000 people in it. And so inevitably, if I stick somebody from Gillette, in my books, and I'm down in Rock Springs doing a library event at the other end of the state, somebody will come up to me and say, is that so-and-so from Gillette that's in your 4th book? I can neither confirm nor deny that maybe the person that you just mentioned. I think it's even worse up on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, like that, because there are only 5,000 enrolled members of the Northern Cheyenne tribe, okay? So whenever I stick any of them in my books, everybody knows who I'm talking about. And it's kind of been fun like that because, with the advent of the television show and all of that, the books and the TV show both are very popular up on the res, on both the Crow and the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. And I got to admit, like that it's gotten to the point now where there are a lot of people up on the res who say that they're characters in my books that I've never met. And I think that's very flattering, to be honest with you. But to go back to Lou, Lou Diamond Phillips, a lot of people have a little bit of problem with Lou like that because in the books, Henry is a monster. He's like 6'4", weighs about 235 pounds. He's built, like a Greek god. He's got the long dark hair and everything. I mean, he is a force, is what he is. He's an SOG, in Vietnam. I mean, he's a very, very capable individual like that. And the funny thing is everybody thinks that Lou Diamond Phillips is like a little guy. He's not. He's like about my size. He's like about 6 foot even, about 200 pounds is what he is. But Robert Taylor is a moose. And so when he stands next to him, he looks shorter. And so anyway, it was kind of fun for me because they actually sent me the DVD of the audition for Lou Diamond Phillips, and I knew that they were having problems casting that role, simply because we live in more enlightened times. As far as Hollywood casting is concerned, we're past the time when you could slap a wig on Sal Mineo and call him an Indian. All right. So and there are a lot of really incredible, wonderful, native actors that are out there. And one of the great things that I take a great deal of pride in with Longmire for the last 6 years is we have employed more native actors than almost the rest of Hollywood combined, which I'm really proud of. People like A. Martinez, like at Zon McLaren, like at Lou, all these people, and then all of these other native actors that have come in, done parts and support roles on the show, and then gone on to do much bigger roles, which is really kind of wonderful. Graham Greene, I can tell you how I met Graham Greene. That was through Lou Diamond Phillips. I was on set, and I hadn't met Graham at all. And Lou comes over and he says, "You want to meet Graham?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And so he walks me over, and he goes, "Graham, this is Craig Johnson. He is our creator." And Graham Greene did not even pause. He turns and looks at me and says, "I have a lot of questions for you." But anyway, we got the DVD for the auditions, right? And I knew they were having trouble, casting the role of Henry. And I remember pulling the DVD out, and it said Lou Diamond Phillips. And I was like, he's too young and too skinny, to play Walt like that. And I put the DVD in, and we're looking at the DVD, and I'm like, when was La Bamba? That was a while ago, wasn't it? Lou's in great shape. He runs 2-3 miles a day, spends 4 hours at the gym, all this stuff. But he is a carbon-based life form like the rest of us, and so he has aged, But, I thought he was perfect. I thought he did a fantastic job. And here's what sealed the deal on him. In the audition, there was a monologue. And in the monologue were 3 contractions. An isn't, a wasn't, and a don't. In the books, Henry doesn't use contractions. And when Lou Diamond Phillips did his reading, he took the contractions out. And I was like, he's read my books. And he had. He had heard about the show, had heard that it was based on a series of books. He's a voracious reader, a really voracious reader, incredibly intelligent individual. Goes out, got the first 3 books, Cold Dish, Death Without Company, Kindness Goes Unpunished, read all 3 of them over the weekend, came in and did the audition and got the role. First day on set, yeah. And first day on set, they're in the Red Pony Bar and Grill, the phone rings, and the director had not read any of the books of the first episode. He had not read any of the books. He picks up the phone and he goes, "Red Pony Bar and Grill and Continual Soiree." And the director goes, "That's good, keep that." And Lou's like, "I will." I told you guys 20 minutes, right? I didn't lie to you or anything, right?
With regard to the books, not the TV show, I'm always impressed with the clever dialogue that you have in there. And not just dialogue between Walt and Henry, but Walt's own internal dialogue is incredibly clever. It's like, where do you get that? Is that something that you've always wanted to do? But from my experience is that most people, they've been doing that since they was a kid because they had a brother that was always giving them crap or something.
Have you guys met my brother? Have you met my brother? No, my wife is sitting right here. If you want to talk about somebody who does not think that I'm very funny at all, like, by the time springtime rolls around, she's like, you need to get out on the road, really. But I don't know, for me, like, it's just, it was a voice, like, I just, found that voice, for Walt. And it was interesting too, like that, because when they started doing the television show, I was kind of surprised by it, like that, because I remember Greer Shepherd, the head producer for the show. She asked me, when we were working on the first, pilot script. She says, "Do you think of Walt as being a verbose kind of character?" And I was like, "Yeah." I mean, the books are first person, so I mean, it's Walt, for 370, 400 pages. And she paused for a second. She goes, "I'm not talking about what Walt thinks, Craig. I'm talking about what Walt actually says." I went back and opened up the cold dish. Walt would think for 3 pages, and then he'd say one sentence, and I was like, okay, you learn something every day, don't you? But yeah, and I think, for many ways, that for me is the joy, because the dialogue is just fun. It's always hilarious like that for me, because I'm never quite sure, what it is that the characters are going to say, because a lot of that comes from your subconscious mind. I mean, you hear a lot of authors, they'll say, "Oh, I just sit down and the voices start talking to me," And I don't know about you, but people who sit in a room by themselves and hear voices, that kind of worries me. But it's just your subconscious mind is what it is, like that. And I grew up with a family of smartasses, like that, and I graduated with my degree, just same as everybody else, And for me, that kind of is what it is that makes for the fun, of the books, like that. I mean, one of my favorites is actually the character of Dog. Walt's got a dog, like that, in the books, like that. And the dog's name is Dog, and he talks to the dog all the time, like that, and it actually led to one of my favorite. That was another one of the ones where somebody told me don't give your protagonist any pets, because then you have to take care of them. And I thought, well, I got a whole ranch full of animals I got to take care of. I don't see why Walt can't take care of one dog, right? And so, and it goes back also, like I got to either have Walt talk to himself, or I got to have him talk to the dog. Well, armed people that talk to themselves worry me even more, right? So that maybe if he's talking to the dog, that'll work out. And I think it was the 5th book, actually, where Walt gets out of the truck and he turns around and looks at the dog and he says, "Stay in the truck and don't play with the radio." And then he shuts the door and takes 2 steps, and then he says it was our private joke. He knew he could play with the radio if he wanted to. And then another one that's from the most recent book, I'm working on now, Depth of Winter, that'll be out it'll be in September, it'll be out. There's actually a part where Walt's trying to get some information from these guys, but he needs a ride too. And so when they pull up in the car, it's a genuine 1959 Cadillac convertible. Wow. Bright pink. And it pulls up and stops, and the guy looks at Walt and he says, "You got any other questions?" And Walt says, "Yeah, how much Mary Kay did you have to sell to get I don't think I could write a serious book if I had to, really, to be honest with you.
Well, I think the way you present the native culture, and the white rural community culture, the tension between the two, it's very impressive, and it must be a serious effort on your part, because I learn from it, and I know the rest of us must be learning a great deal as well. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how deliberate that effort is and where you're going with it.
It's not really all that deliberate. I mean, it's just a part of the world where I live. Like that, I mean, immediately to the north of where my ranch is, right there on the Montana border, that's the Northern Cheyenne and the Crow Reservation. And, for me, the real reason is because they're just incredible people. They're just fantastic people. And for me, it's just, it would be, if I was giving you, because that's what I do with each one of those books, I'm giving you where I live. It's a place I love, more than anything else. It was 9 below when we left to come here, and I'm still there, okay? Because I love it that much. And one of the main reasons why I love it as much as I do is the Northern Cheyenne and the Crow people. They're just incredible, incredible people. And the difficulties that go along, with those two cultures, running along side by side. With the very first book, with the cold dish, I knew, I was going to have 2 individuals, and they were both going to have to be emblematic of the 2 cultures. And that's how Henry and Walt, came to be. And I knew that friendship between them was always going to be what it was, that was going to be the glue for these books. It seemed kind of important like that. But that'll be in the books forever. It always will be there.
Perfect, thank you.
My pleasure.
Well, quick compliment, Chris. I'm getting real concerned about the dumbing down of America, considering the great writing in this series and the TV series that are still on TV. And I'm still shaking my head on the decision, but I do appreciate the dialogue. Two quick questions. How did you come up with the name Walt Longmire? And do you think there's any chance of a movie?
Let's see. Well, I mean, right now, like they're kind of like, bouncing around and we're waiting to see. What they're talking about is like limited run series, like, a couple of episodes per year, or the possibility of TV movies, like, which would be really kind of nice because that would move us from an hour-long format into like, an hour and a half to 2 hour format, like that, which would give them much more of an opportunity to possibly take the plot line from one of the books and be able to utilize that, with a much longer arc, which I think would be kind of wonderful. Yeah, so we'll see. We'll see. We're still waiting to find out. These things take a lot longer, than you really, would think. I kind of laugh about it a little bit, I have to be honest with you, because, for like 7 or 8 years, you guys would come up to me and pat me on the back and say, well, when they make a TV show or a movie out of your books? And I would be like, I'm writing a series of books about the sheriff of the least populated county in the least populated state in America, and I got published. Don't you think I've kind of worn my miracles out? And as it turns out, you guys were right and I was wrong. Okay, so, and again, going back to the name, look at it actually, one of the other big guys that I really enjoy, is Charles Dickens. I love Charles Dickens' work. And one of the things I love about Charles Dickens was he would always name a character, and you didn't have to know that character. You heard the name, you knew what that character was like, right? I mean, if I use the name, if I tell you the name Scrooge, you don't have to dig for that. You'll get it pretty quick, right? And so I wanted something that was going to be kind of emblematic for Walt, something that would be who he was. And so one of the big tragedies in Walt's life has been the death of his wife, and he's never really going to get over that. He never will. It will haunt him, till his grave and probably beyond. And so I thought, okay, you got this clinically depressed sheriff, who's been depressed for 5, 6 years, whatever. What would be a good name for him under those terms? Longmire. Longmire. That might work. And then one time, I used to do a lot of mountaineering, and I was going into Mount Rainier National Park, and the first lodge on the right-hand side as you go in is called John Longmire Lodge. And I was like, there it is. And Walter was actually my grandfather's name. That's where I got that. I don't know where the mic is. Okay, over here. Okay, sorry.
What can you tell us about the future that's coming?
What can I tell you about the future that's coming? As far as the books are concerned? I like the way you asked that question. Because all across the country, the way that it's been started off is, at the end of the Western Star, and I have to go, no! Don't tell that. Actually, I can't give away too much. I can't tell you too much. It's for the first time in my life, I'm at the point where I don't want to ruin, what's going to happen in the next book, for anybody who hasn't read the Western Star just yet. And so I actually can't answer that question too much. I got to be honest with you. I can tell you that the title is Depth of Winter. And it's from the Albert Camus quote that even in the depth of winter, I found within myself an eternal summer. And I can also tell you that it's a book called Depth of Winter, but it never gets below 90 degrees. That's a geographic clue for you there. That's all you get. Thank you.
A couple of things.
Okay, I may have a couple of answers. You never know.
I teach writing, and one of the things that I've used of your material are some of your descriptions, but also the building of relationships. And so when I'm looking at quality books to have kids read, I have them read Cold Dish.
Oh, thank you.
So what is, with how PC have you been approached with using the term Indian instead of Native American?
That's really pretty easy. I can tell you that because what happened was that I used to try and be politically correct, and I'd be up on the res with a bunch of my buddies, and I would say something about Native American, and they would look at me and they would go, "Where were you born?" And I'd say, "I was born in America." "So you would be a Native American too, then, wouldn't you?" Okay, so, I mean, for me, like, it's, I'm always sensitized to that kind of thing like that because I write about the Northern Cheyenne, but I'm not Northern Cheyenne. So it's very important that I make sure that I get that stuff right. But, in many ways, it's much more important for them, for you to get the tribe right, the clan right, and all of those things right, than it is, these artificial designations, that were given by some Italian guy that found the wrong continent, like that's,
I can sure verify that working with the San Poil, the Colville Nation in eastern Washington too. There was another question, I've lost it. So
Oh,
I
no.
lost the mic.